Disclaimer: the contents within this video are supplemental to the safety lessons taught in class by the tech ed teacher and is not the definitive last word on the subject at hand. No person or student should attempt to follow any of the safety guidelines herein or use equipment until they receive safety training from the tech ed teacher within the shop itself and only after completing their safety demonstration and written test. This is the sheet metal squaring shear, and also known as a foot shear. And what it does is it lets us shear off metal, and we can shear it off any angle we want, but we can also use it to square up our material by using the fence. It's a fairly straightforward tool. There is only a few safety points to concern yourself on this one. The first one is never reach behind the guard. Alright, this is the guard. It tells you to keep your fingers up front. Alright, in behind here is where the blade is. So as long as our fingers are on this side of the guard, we shouldn't have a problem. This guard also moves up and down, and if you were to get your fingers underneath the guard, you could pinch them or crush them. So keep your fingers in front and out from underneath the guard. Because you could have a situation where you're trying to line up your cut, all right? There is always a risk that your fingers or your material could slide and you could put your fingers near the guard where it could be crushed. That is why this is a one-person only tool. We do not want you to accidentally get your fingers near or under it and then somebody else jumps on this because you don't have the foot strength or the weight to cut a piece of metal on this tool. So one person only. If you need help cutting your material, get your teacher over here. He'll help you cut. So the safe use of this looks much like this. Let's say we want to cut and shear a line approximately there. All I need to do is look down between the guard and the blade, line that cut up with the edge of the blade, and then I could put pressure down on the piece of material and cut it. And it shears it off. We should also note that this slice of material here bolted to the shear indicates the thickness that you can cut. It must be no thicker than that. From this angle you can see what the cutting blades are. This edge and this edge right here, these two silver edges, are the cutting blade. So while someone is cutting, under no circumstances should that person get their fingers in this area as well, reaching for a cut piece of metal, for example. Alright, so as the operator, just make sure that nobody's reaching into this area while you're cutting. This is what it looks like from that angle. Alright, this is the box and pan brake. It's used for bending metal, making boxes and pans. It's also a fairly straightforward tool. It only has two real concerns for us, and both are pinch points. So in operation, you need to lift up the bending fingers. Alright, place your material underneath them, and there's more than just these two. There's a whole row that we can put on there and move around for the job. We lock our material in place. Okay, make sure everything's lined up. We're not going to get into that with the safety video. And then we're going to go ahead and bend our material. So we want to grab onto these bending handles here and bend our metal. Just like that. And we can release it. And then we have a nice bent edge. Bend to whatever angle we want. It's very important to put your hands on the handles when you bend. so that your hands aren't in the way. If you were to somehow get your hands in here, or on any of the other fingers, if they were all on here, you would pinch, and you'd get very bad crushing or pinching on your fingertips. The other thing to be mindful of is that if you're going to clamp your material in here, your fingers are away from the edge here. If your fingers get underneath this, these fingers and the frame, as you crank it down, they're going to bend your fingers. So as you pull down on the lever here, you can pinch the skin right off your fingers. So that's a really bad thing. You also need to know that to safely operate this, you don't get any kickback or breakage, or you don't try and force the box and pan brake to do something you don't want it to do. You need to adhere to the text written on here. Alright, so do not use on round stock or tubing, flat stock only. Otherwise, there could be failure in the equipment and it could injure you. So flat sheet up to 16 gauge max. If you don't know what 16 gauge is, it's the same material that we talked about on the squaring shear that indicates how thick you can cut and bend. And there's also a gap that needs to be adjusted. Check with your teacher, make sure all that is good before you go ahead and do anything. Alright, so on the off chance you have a large sheet of sheet metal you need to break down, we do have a power shear as well. Alright, it acts like a jigsaw. Okay, it has a blade here that moves up and down. Your material goes in between the blade and you cut it. You can cut straight, cut curves. It's a handy tool. So some of the safety concerns with this, of course, is it's a power tool, so the first thing we do is we check the cord for damage, making sure that nothing's wrong with it. We don't want to have an accident because of a damaged cord. The cord looks good. Plug it in. The other thing to note is when we're using, we have the blade that moves up and down. So we don't want to get our fingers in that blade. We don't want to get the cord in that blade. There's a little gauge on the side here. Your metal must fit in the upper gauge in order to be correct to cut. And we also want to make sure that we clamp it down safely so that we can, cut it safely. Larger sheets might not need that. But the smaller pieces like this, just going to clamp down using a piece of angle iron and a pair of vice grips. And then we'll go ahead and just make a quick cut. And it looks like this. So rather than editing that out, I wanted to show you that there are times where you need a second clamp. So that's a good use, a good example. You need to put a second clamp on there so it doesn't move. Sheet metal can be finicky. Here we go again. Just wait for it to stop moving before we set it down. Unplug it. And that's the proper safe use of using the power shear.